Hi everybody, my name is Victoria Albert, and like many of you, I have been inside the house for the last several weeks. So today we're going to be working on one of my favorite things to do, which is to create a self-portrait. And self-portraits are great when you're stuck inside because you really don't need anything. Just smile and snap a selfie. Or make a weird face. I'm not gonna judge. But today I'm going to be walking you through the process of composing your photo, sketching out the proportions, and working on value and shading. Today, you'll see my process of working on my portrait from start to finish, and I hope that what you see helps in creating your own at home. Before we get started, the first thing we're going to talk about are the rules. Sounds serious, but not really. Let's take a look at some of the rules that I like to keep in mind while creating a self-portrait.
The first rule is draw what you see, not what you know. What I mean by this is look at the photo very carefully as you work. We tend to have these ideas about our own looks. I have a big nose, my ears are really small. It's important not to let those things get in the way of working on your drawing. Draw from observation. Rule number 2, proportions are guidelines. We are all unique. Even though we all share the same features, eyes, nose, mouth, ears, we do all look different, and that's because all of these features are slightly different from person to person. Someone might have larger eyes than somebody else. Somebody might have a nose that's shaped a little differently. However, proportions are important because it helps us know where on the face these things belong. Making sure that our eyes aren't too high, making sure that our nose isn't too low. It's important to keep all these things in the right place because that'll make it much easier when trying to make your self-portrait look like you. Number 3 is forget what you're drawing. Rather than focus on drawing an eye, focus on its shape. And basically, all this means is that when you're working, think about the shape of the object. Don't worry about making an eye look like an eye. If you see a football shape, draw a football shape. If you see that it's wide on one end and skinny on another, or vice versa, rely on what you're seeing. If you focus on drawing from observation, rather than worrying about the end result, your end result will come more naturally. And rule number 4, the first step is composition. It is super important to make sure that your composition is sound before moving on because it's going to help you avoid headaches later on. You want to adjust things like the size and position of your portrait before adding any detail. Before you start your portrait, you want to make sure that all the features that you intend to include will fit on your paper. This means that you won't run into any trouble later by noticing too late that you made something too big or too small.
All right, it's time we enter the no shame zone. Don't worry about the end result. Focus on the process and enjoy it. Now that we've been through the basics, it's time to grab a piece of paper and a pencil and get started.
The first step in creating a self-portrait is to consider the composition or the placement of objects in the artwork. In this case, I'm going to be working from a photograph, and in the photograph, there's a lot of empty space. In this case, I think I'm going to get rid of some of that space by zooming in my photo and focusing more on the face and the shoulders. I don't want to see so much of the sweater, I don't need to see so much of the background, because in this case, the face is going to be the focus of my artwork. Once I'm happy with my composition, I'm going to move on to drawing. Before anything else, I like to add a small value scale, something that I usually just keep on the side. This is going to help me recognize the lightness and darkness of the marks that I'm making and help me keep that in check as I work. If I scribble really hard with my pencil, I end up with some very dark marks, some dark values. As I let up pressure on my pencil, the values get lighter. For the most part, while we're working, we're going to be using values somewhere in the middle here, because values that are dark like this are more for final details. These are the marks that we put in once we're absolutely sure of the mark that we're making. If you start off pressing super hard with your pencil while you work, chances are there are going to be things that you want to erase and that you want to change, and they're very hard to get rid of when you're pressing this hard. So while we work, we're going to stay on the lighter side of the value scale. Let's begin with the shape of the face. I'm going to start with an oval. Even though our faces are all slightly different, A good shape to start with is an oval, and it can always be changed or added to in order to make it look more like the shape of your own face. Now in this case, my head is tilted slightly to the left, so I'm going to start with my oval and I'm going to tilt it to the side. And you'll notice that while I work, I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure on my pencil. I'm keeping things relatively light. That way, if I want to make any changes in the future, I can easily. Now that I have my oval, I'm going to start measuring out some proportions. Now, we're going to start by placing a line down the center, and this is going to help keep the features in the right place. And again, because my head is tilted slightly in the image, my line is not going straight up and down. I've tilted it just slightly. From here, we're going to start measuring out where certain features of the face go. Now, your eyes are the center of your face. They might look a bit higher up because our hair covers part of the top of our head. But if I were to measure from the top of my head to the bottom of my chin and meet in the middle, your eyes are in that spot. So on my oval, I'm going to find the center and I'm going to make a line going across. From there, we're going to go from that line to the bottom of the chin, meet in the middle again, and make another mark. This is for the nose. And then one last time, from that mark to the bottom, meet in the center, and this will be for the mouth. Now again, these are just general proportions. Even though we are all different, the features of the face are in about the same place. These are not rules to get stuck by. If your nose happens to be a little bit higher than this mark, that's okay. Don't feel like you have to put it right on the mark and keep it there, because it might be a little bit different, especially depending on whether or not your head is looking straight on, if it's tilted, if your chin is tilted up a little bit. All these little things will change the placements of your eyes, nose, and mouth, but these are good starting points to help you measure. Let's start placing the features. On either side of this center line, I'm going to be placing my eyes. And here again, I'm just putting little marks to show about where my eyes are going to go. My nose will be here and my mouth will be here. Now you'll notice as I work, I tend to go from feature to feature, not staying on one thing for too long. The reason that I tend to do this is because sometimes we get so invested working on one thing that we tend to lose sight of the whole picture. I might end up with a really, really beautiful eye that I'm super, super proud of, and then I realize too late that it's in the wrong spot. Do I erase the eye that I'm very proud of, or do I go and change everything else around it? So we're going to be working on different parts of the portrait at the same time. This way we can kind of keep all the features in check. Now let's talk about the eyes. Normally, the eyes are kind of like a football shape, something like this. However, we all have different shaped eyes. We all have the same features, but the reason that we all look different is because my eyes might be bigger than yours, they might be smaller than yours. And both of my eyes are different depending on which way I'm facing. So I'm going to be carefully looking at the shape of my eye, the way that the top lid arches, the way that it goes in a little bit before slowly going down and coming back up. And I'm going to really be paying attention to the shape of my eye. Aside from this football shape, mine looks more like this, at least in this photo. So paying close attention to the shape of my eye, I'm going to start by placing that shape that I see where I marked for my eye. And then I'm going to go over onto the other one, which looks a little bit different. I see this one is a bit more curved on the side than this one, because this one is on the side where my head is turned a bit more to the side. A way to help judge the distance of the eyes is to measure the space between. Normally, the space of your eyes are from end to end about the same as the space between your eyes. So if you measure from the two ends, your eye, and put it in the center, you should be able to fit one more eye in between there. Here, I'm starting to darken the eyelashes. And if you notice, in my case, I'm wearing a little bit of eyeliner, and then down at the bottom are just my eyelashes. But my eyelashes are not something that you can count one by one. They're more of a dark shadow that goes underneath my eye. And here, they're more of a dark line that follow above my eye. So rather than making a bunch of little eyelashes, I'm going to darken the top lid in the shape that I see, in which case it's a little bit thicker of a line towards the back of my eye than in the front, so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other eye, just keep it in check. I'm going to go ahead and add in the inside parts of the eye. Inside of the eye, you will see a circle for the iris, the colored part of your eye, and a smaller circle in the center, which is black. That's the pupil. And then normally you'll see some spots of highlights, which are like this here, spots of brightness where the light is reflecting on my eye. So those are spots that I will leave white in order to help brighten up the eye. Usually, unless somebody's eyes are wide open, like they're scared or they're angry or they're surprised, you don't see the whole circle of the iris. You might see the sides of it, and the top and the bottom, or at least the top or the bottom, tend to be touching the eyelid. So in this case, I see the sides of my iris, and then the top and the bottom are both covered by the eyelid. So I'm going to make sure that when I add my eye in, that I keep that in mind. Making sure not to make my iris too big. It's also helpful to look and see how much of the white of the eye you see on either side. In this case, I see a little bit less white on this side than I do on this side. So I will keep that in mind as I work. I'm gonna add that dark pupil. And I see the spots where my eye is reflecting the light, those highlights. I see one here, and a little one here. So I'll color around that. Now in my case, I have brown eyes, and in the picture, it's not really easy to see the difference between the brown part of my eye and the black center. So if you don't see a big difference, you can let them blend right in. And I'm even going to shade a little bit inside so that the whites of my eyes are not so bright. In the picture, if you notice, they're not the brightest part of the photo. In fact, it almost looks more of a gray color. Now, I notice here that I made my iris a little bit too big, so I'm gonna go in and get rid of some of that. I'm comparing what I see here and the space that I see to my photo. And I notice that in my photo, I see a little bit more of the white part. That's better. let's add in the crease above the eye. I'm looking at these lines here, and I'm paying attention to how close they are to the actual tip of the eyelid. For example, here it's close, but if I go up here, it's a little bit further away from my eye, and then it comes back closer again on the end. Again, I'm keeping my lines very, very light. I don't want them to stand out too much. Now with the eyebrows, I'm going to see what shape my eyebrows really are. In this case, my eyebrows are flatter down here at the bottom, and then they curve up above my eye. On the top, they're more of a curve altogether. I don't see this flat section that I saw. Here, the hairs are a little bit thinner, and here they're much darker. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I work. Now notice, while I'm working, I'm not really putting in a shape. I'm not gonna draw one line. I'm going to shade in some of the spots that I see. In this case, the spot here where I see it's a little bit more flat on the bottom. And then I'm going to let it kind of curve up and over. Now, something that I'm noticing as I put in the eyebrows is the space of my face. Here, on this side, the side of my eye and my eyebrow are very close to the side of my face, whereas here, they're much further away. This is something that now I can add in as I work. I see that this eyebrow should be very close, so I'm gonna go ahead and start putting in and changing the shape of my face just slightly, so that I see that this is close and this is a little bit further. Again, this is why it's very important to work light so that you can make any adjustments you need as you see them. And I've got these little hairs that stick up here, and it comes back over. I'm also going to start shading in little areas that I see. Like for example, this area here inside of my eye is much darker than this area on the nose. So to help show a little bit of form, I'm gonna shade just slightly some of those spaces in as I start to darken my eyebrows. It helps to also turn your pencil and color or shade in the same direction that you actually see the hairs. So here, the hairs kind of go up this way, whereas here I see them turned a bit to the side. And then it gets very skinny in the back here. And it doesn't curve that much, so I'm gonna turn that a little bit. And again, I see those little eyelashes here make this darker kind of area, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that in. Now, I don't want to get stuck in this area for too long, so I'm going to start to move around a little bit. Let's work on the nose. We'll come back to the eyes in a little bit. Going down to this next mark, I'm going to start off with the nostrils. And the nostrils are these openings here. So here I'm starting out with my nostrils, and I see them as little curved lines with a bit of shadow underneath. I'm not going to draw them as circles or ovals because then it would look like you can see up my nose, and I really hope you can't see up my nose. I'm also going to be putting in some curved lines that'll show the edges of my nose. And some shadow underneath. Where the light is blocked. So I see this part is a little bit darker than this part. I also see little bits of darker value in the corners of my nose where they turn and recede just a little bit. So I'm going to add in some of those values very lightly, just to kind of help my brain understand that this part is in the back and this part is in the front. And at this point, you can go ahead and get rid of some of those lines if they're in the way. I see that this is the brightest part of my nose, so these should be a little bit darker here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just add a little bit of shade in. Notice how I am staying super light because I can always go over it in the future and make it a little bit darker. But it's a lot harder to go in reverse if you start out too dark. And here I'm just kind of noticing certain places that might be too light or too dark, and I'm kind of going over them. Underneath my eye, I see this curve. Now, I'm not going to put a line there because lines are going to make it look too much like a cartoon. Instead, I'm going to shade a little bit underneath the eye where I see some slightly darker values, and it does make kind of a curve. So let's do this where it's a little bit darker. And on the other side, I see some dark values in here. Again, I'm kind of moving around my image, working in pieces so that I make sure that I'm keeping everything in balance. I think I'm gonna work on the mouth. Again, there are still things that need to be worked on in each of these places, but I'm gonna go ahead and get the rest of my features in so that I can start kind of balancing them out. For my mouth in this case is open. So if this would normally be about the bottom of the mouth, I'm going to make sure that my open mouth includes the space where that line is. I'm looking at first the inside shape. I'll worry about the lips afterwards. Now I see that there is a slight curve in here, and I'm going to make sure that there's a very, very slight curve as I work my way out. It's not totally flat. I'm also looking to compare and see where the sides of my mouth end. Now in this case, if I were to go to the end, the corner part here, and go straight up, it's about where the edge of the iris is. And if I go on the other side, it's kind of on this inside part of the iris. So I'm going to use that to compare where the edges of my mouth should go in my drawing. So here, if I go to the edge of the iris and I go straight down, it's about here. And on this side, it's about here. And I'm gonna use that to help kind of gauge how wide my smile should be. I see that it goes in and then it kind of curves down this way. So I'm gonna try to follow that shape as best I can. I can look at the lips now and see what kind of curve it makes. Some of us have more of a pronounced curve in our lips. In my case, when I smile, it's almost flat, but there's a little bit of a curve to it. So starting at the corners where I see the curve start, I'm going to work my way in. And I'm not going to make a line. Instead, I'm going to shade it since it is a spot that is darker. Same thing on the bottom. Let's shade a little bit in here. And it kind of goes in and then it curves down. So I'm gonna let it go in a little bit before curving out and down. When it comes to teeth, the trick to drawing teeth is to not draw teeth, as silly as that sounds. Rather than drawing each individual shape, I'm going to draw the edges, so the edges of the gums and the edges of the bottom of the teeth, and then shade a little bit inside so I don't see each of the individual teeth as separate pieces rather than as a whole. So first, I'm gonna start with the center where I have this little curve of my gums. And that is not in the middle. Let's move that. And then I'm going to very lightly add in the shape of the teeth. So if I start by going down, I can see the edge comes out this way, up, curves, where my tooth is smaller. And then if you notice, here is very, very dark. I don't see anything. And then I see the gum starts around here. These teeth are much brighter than these teeth because these are in the back. So I'm gonna go ahead and put in that corner part where I don't see anything. I'm gonna shade it in darker. And then I'm just gonna shade out from there a little bit. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to find the shape of my bottom teeth, the bottom of my teeth. And then I'm going to add in the gums where I see them. Again, not pressing too hard. I'm just gonna go in and add a little bit of detail where I see it. I'm looking for spots of light and dark. Like here, where we saw that darkness in the corner of the mouth, I see it kind of travel up along the inside, right along the bottom of the lip. So I'm going to follow that curve that I see. I also see a little bit of shadow in here to help show my smile. Now, I'm going to start putting in some boundaries for the edge of the face. And the oval was our starting point, but now we need to change it up a little bit because things like the tilt of your face, your hair, these are all going to change the shape of that oval. In my case here, the oval
ends very close to my eyebrow, but is far from the eye because of the way that my hair creates a line. So I'm gonna travel along the edge of the face and compare the angles that I see to what's in my drawing. In this case, if I take my pencil and I place it along the side of my eyebrow here, I see that there's this kind of angle. And if I translate it over here, that means that my hair should come in about here. Then it turns and starts to angle down. And I'm going to follow that turn that I see. Still staying kind of messy, just sketching things in. We don't want to put a line because a line again will end up making it look more cartoon. We want to focus more on placing in shadows and areas of light and dark. It kind of curves in here by my eye. And I even see this shadow that looks like it comes down from my eyebrow. So I'm gonna go ahead and very lightly put that in. Same thing on this side. There's a shadow that comes out and down by my cheek. Leaving space for my chin, reminding myself that I have this kind of round shape in here, and then there's space between my chin and my mouth. So I'm going to make sure that I have space for that round spot that I see and underneath between that and my lip. So making sure that when I create the shape of my chin, I come down far enough. Watching that angle. Here it goes like this. And it kind of comes around and back up. Adding in my ear. Generally, the ear, if your face is looking straight on, goes from about the corner of the eye down to the bottom of the nose. In my case, I only see part of the ear because my hair is covering it. So I'm not going to draw the whole thing. I'm going to draw what I see the way that I see it. Here, if I put my pencil on the bottom of my ear, it looks like it's about where the bottom of the nose is. So that's gonna help me judge where to start that shape, which is pretty much just a curve. I'm wearing an earring, so I'll leave space for that. And then here, it kind of starts to disappear into my hair. So I'm gonna leave that kind of dark and let it just kind of fade away. Again, I'm going to double check some of my values, start looking around for areas that are darker than others. I see in here, there's a little bit of darkness in comparison to here because my nose sticks out further, so it should be brighter. So I'm going to shade a little bit by the sides of the nose, just to help my brain kind of understand that this is in the back and this is in the front. And at this point, if you are comfortable with what you have, you can start erasing some of those lines so that you can see the features a little bit better. I also see this spot's a little bit darker on the lip. There's a little bit of shadow underneath. Towards the edges of your face, it should be a little bit darker than in the center because your face is curved. So it is turning away from you and the shading is going to be a little bit darker along these edges here. So where it starts to turn
especially back towards the hair, I'm going to be shading in. I see, for example, this is very light, whereas this is much darker. This is very light, the sides are darker. And here's where I want to start using pressure to add some of those darker values in to show the boundaries of the face. Put my little bit of my ear in over here. Let's see where that begins. If I put my pencil at the bottom, see it about here. Just a little bit. In my case, because my head is tilted slightly, this ear is a little bit lower than this ear. Let's start putting in the neck and shoulders. If you place your fingers on the sides of your neck and you move them up, you eventually touch your ears. Our necks need to be wide enough to support the weight of our head. When we look at the photo, they do curve in a little bit beforehand, and part of that disappears behind the side of my face. So I'm going to look at about where I see the start of my neck, and I'm going to make sure that I match that on my paper. Now in this case, I see the side. In this case, it gets covered by my hair. So wherever I see that hair come in, that's where I'm going to work on my paper. If I go to where the neck comes out from behind the face here, and I go up, it's just outside the side of my mouth. So I'm going to use that as my reference point. I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna move over a bit, and then I'm gonna mark where my neck comes out. On this side, I'm gonna follow this curve, and it looks like it kind of comes in here. I can also do the same thing where I place my pencil and I use a point of reference. In this case, the only thing that I see that really coincides with it is the edge of the eyebrow. So I can use that to kind of gauge where the neck should begin, somewhere around here. But again, because it does blend in with the hair, I'm going to just bring that shadow that I've started down. And then here, I see it comes down before getting covered up by my hair. Giving myself a little bit of space here where my neck would curve, I'm going to add in the line for my shirt. Now let's say if you could see my shoulders, let's kind of pretend. I'm gonna go out and down, out and down. I'm gonna start putting in the lines for the hair. And rather than thinking about the actual individual hairs, I'm going to think about the shape that I see and the boundaries between my hair and other parts of the photo. So I like to start, if you have a part, you can start there. I have a little part here where my hair goes one way and then it turns another way. So I'm going to start in that spot, curving up, and I'm gonna look at the edge of my hair, see what kind of shape it makes until it gets down by my shoulder. For me, I see it kind of curves up, goes to the side, and then it goes like this, out in waves until it hits my shoulder. On the other side, comes out. Now hair is really fun to do because rather than doing each individual strand, you can kind of put it in sections, and you get to be a little bit more free with it, especially along the edges. So here I'm looking for areas of light and dark, areas of different values, just like I do anywhere else. But what helps me is to start with different sections that I see. For example, I have this section of hair that comes out and it curves this way. So if I start by placing some of those boundaries in where my hair curves, some of those curls that I see down at the bottom that come over my shirt, kind of goes out on the edge here. I'm gonna put in some of those directional lines that'll help me kind of understand the way that my hair flows. I have a bit of blonde on top, so I'm gonna put in the boundary between the brown and the blonde where I see it. I see it kind of flows this way and then it goes down. And there are lots of curls going on in here. This one comes down over the shirt. Now that I have some of my directional lines in, I'm just going to start shading areas that I see that are darker than others. For example, in here, this is very dark, but the outside of the curve is much lighter. Now, remember that your hair covers part of your head. So when I work up top here, I'm not going to stop at the top of the oval. I'm gonna come in a little bit, and this will make my forehead a little bit smaller. Underneath my chin, I'm going to shade a bit because this is much darker than my face. My face is blocking the light from hitting directly underneath the chin, so I do see this shadow here, and it is slightly lighter here, so I'm going to be darker and then lighter in different spots. You'll see that along the bottom and the edges of my hair, I tend to be a little bit more free. That's because you really can't see a lot of the boundaries. In some places there are some big curls or lines that stand out a little bit more. But in a lot of cases, we have all these spots where there's lots of little hairs that you can't really see on their own. So it's okay to get a little bit free with it. Hair tends to look more natural when it's a little bit more random rather than having each of the pieces placed side by side. You'll see here that there's really no boundary between where my hair stops and where my head begins. It's okay to let them blend. It'll look more natural that way. As your drawing starts to come together, it's important to look back and forth and compare the differences between your drawing and your photo. I see some differences in, for example, the hairline, where here it's curved and here it goes up too much. So make sure that you are looking back and forth between your photo and your picture to look for things that you might have missed while you were working.
All right, everybody, we did it. We are finished. Woohoo! And here she is. I hope that you enjoyed this process. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope that you enjoy creating your own self-portraits at home. Bye, everybody.